when I was looking at the outtakes for the first time, if they lived up to their notorious reputation of being of the Beatles breaking up and it being a horrible time for them, and they were depressing, I don't think I would have made the film. I would have said, sorry, I get someone else to do it.
Okay, I'm rolling.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Get Back from inception to final cut was basically 4 years. Longest time I've ever spent in the cutting room on one project. The first cut was 18 hours long. The Get Back project is not just archival footage, it's also archival audio, because they were filming with two 16mm cameras and had two Nagra recorders. So there's about, all up, there's 150 hours of audio and about 60 hours of footage. In terms of restoring the footage, we used a lot of equipment that we have down here in Park Road Post in New Zealand. I couldn't even tell you what all the names of all the equipment is, because fortunately we have clever people to restore it, not me.
We're talking about 14 songs we hope to get.
I've got a feeling.
How many have we already recorded good enough?
No.
I'm wondering if in the back of your mind you ever thought, yeah, I'd like to sneak some documentaries in between these fictional theatrical blockbusters, or whether it's just coincidence that these two things came up.
I tend to just do projects that interest me, that I have a passion for, because what's the point of doing anything if you don't feel passionate about it? So, everything I've done, 33, King Kong was my favorite movie, so I did a remake of that. Lord of the Rings, came out of a love of Ray Harryhausen films when I was growing up. And my grandfather was in the First World War. I've always had a long-term interest in the First World War. And the Beatles, I've loved the Beatles ever since I was a kid, so there's no plan. It just happens to be that I got invited to do this, and not in a million years would I have ever said no. The fact that I loved the footage so much and fell in love with it when I saw it, and fell in love with the humour and just the historical rarity of it, and the fact that it was entertaining. It wasn't miserable. It shows drama. It shows a plan that derails, and it shows how they're reacting to a crisis. It has, it's not all plain sailing, but it's incredibly entertaining to watch the rushes. I thought, well, if these outtakes are entertaining, I should be able to somehow knock together a reasonably good movie from these outtakes.
Now we're going to take the Beatles and I'll be quiet.
Oh, you recording our conversation?
Was doing an 18-hour cut partly a way of hinting broadly that we need to make a miniseries?
It's hard to figure out how to approach this huge bulk of material. We had 130, 140 hours of audio, and then all this 60-odd hours of footage. It's so massive amount of stuff. And so we thought, well, the first thing we have to do is just get it down to a shorter length. It'll be way too long, but let's at least just get it down to something that we can manage. And so that was when the 18-hour cut happened. And that was still, the plan was to keep going and make it 2.5 hours. We did that, and then we sort of kept putting it in and trimming it down, putting more stuff, putting new stuff in. There wasn't any 18-hour cut, trimming the 18-hour cut down, finding new stuff, putting it in. And we ended up with 6 hours. And so then the moment came, which we just thought, how on earth do we get it any shorter than this? Because this, in our view, at that point, you're starting to commit a crime against rock and roll history if you start trimming any more out, because there's stuff there that people have to see. They haven't seen it for 50 years, and anything that we weren't going to put in this film, I was painfully aware it's likely to go back in the vault for another 50 years. So we had to then own up to Disney and to the Beatles, to Apple Corps, that we thought the film should be 6 hours, not 2.5 hours. That was the most nervous time I've had in this whole project, was then waiting for their verdict on the 6 hours. And the Beatles were the ones, everyone was waiting for them to look at it. Ringo and Paul and Olivia, and the verdict came back from them saying 6 hours is great. 6 hours, we understand why it's 6 hours, we're happy with 6 hours. So once the Beatles signed off on the 6 hours, everyone else was okay with it.
Want to do it once more then? Yes. I mean, we'll never get a chance to do it again.
Let it be, let it be.
People have focused basically over the years on what they know about the material that's kind of in the first part, where they're still trying to get it together and not. And then, joy comes later after things ease up. Well,
even Twickenham isn't that bad when I look at it. I mean, Twickenham is obviously notorious because in later interviews, all the Beatles said how much they hated Twickenham, and that was the lowest of the low moments, and it's when George leaves and stuff. But looking at Twickenham, there are some really great stuff in Twickenham, really funny stuff. It's not all bad. As a person that likes stories, I'm glad it all went wrong, because the most boring film would have been the Beatles arrive at Twickenham do 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsing. It all goes great. They build the set. They shoot the TV special. It's fantastic. It's all great. And they're finished and the album's released. I mean, that would be interesting, because Michael Lindsay Hogg will still be filming it all. But if it went smoothly, it wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting as the story is, because it all goes wrong for them. It derails for various reasons. And they're constantly trying to lay the tracks in front of the train to sort of get to some sort of a good result out of this rather chaotic sort of project that they're on. And also from the point of view of the four Beatles, I think we learn more about their personalities and who they were as human beings because they're reacting to things going wrong than they are as reacting to things all working out well. It's when you're dealing with a crisis that you actually learn a bit more about the people that you're watching and how they deal with a crisis is what's really interesting.
None of us has had the idea of what the show's going to be.
I've got a feeling.
I would dig to play on stage, Nobody else wants to do a show.
I think we've got a bit shy.
Oh,
Were there any scenes that was especially important to you to get in there that you felt like kind of, this is really corrects the narrative?
One of the narratives that gets repeated quite a bit in the books is that on the day that George walked out, and the day that George quit the band, he and John had an enormous argument that resulted in a fist fight. They actually punched each other. And that sort of has always upset me because the idea of John and George having a fist fight, I always hated reading that. I didn't like it. And when I started to get involved in this project, I met up with Olivia Harrison. Olivia said George did say that when they were in Hamburg, there was some altercation in the group over dinner and they threw food at each other. They kind of had some physical alteration. And then I kept looking at the outtakes. Some newspaper guy has written an article saying there was rumoured that at a TV rehearsal some nights ago, Beatles, John and George had a fist fight with each other. And John and George, the two men who can no longer speak to this in the current day, they are really angry to see this. And George says, he says there was a fist fight. John says, that didn't happen. Sue them. And then John says, the only time it's ever got close to that was they played food at Hamburg. Exactly the story that Olivia said. So you got the two men who were so-called involved in this fight, absolutely angry as anything that this even got talked about because it's never happened. And so I was so pleased to see that because as a fan, I never had to think about John and George having a fight ever again because it never ever happened.
So when you've got Paul and Ringo still alive, who maybe think they have these bad memories, and then you're saying, no, actually, you guys were having a good time and really getting along well and collaborating amazingly. Is that hard to talk them into that? Yes, you were having a good time, you just don't remember it.
December 2017, Paul McCartney came to New Zealand for a concert. And I'd seen it all. I had it on an iPad. And so I went into the dressing room and I sort of, shook hands. I said, so Paul, I've seen all the outtakes from Let It Be outtakes. And I could see the nervousness on his face because he hasn't seen the outtakes. I mean, he was there in 1969, but he certainly hasn't seen the footage. And he said, oh, yeah. And he was sort of, I could see there was a trepidation or a dread on his face. And I just said, look, it's whatever you think it is, it's not what you think it is, because I thought it was going to be miserable, but I'm amazed at how funny and happy it is. It's completely different to what I imagined. I could sort of see just me saying that. He said, yeah, what, really? And then I started showing him things on an iPad, and they were only little bits and pieces, but he was starting to look at stuff. And then I went to LA a couple of times at that point, and still pre-pandemic, and visited Ringo and showed Ringo things. And so I think I started to ease them into the idea of the fact that the Let It Be experience was not what they remember. Because they remember the movie in May 1970, as you say, which is they were in the midst of breaking up, and it must have been such a miserable, stressful time for them. But they've somehow imposed all their memories of the Get Back sessions from January 69 on the May 1970 release of the film. So Let It Be for them, it sort of is a symbol of a very unhappy time that they were personally experiencing when the band was breaking up.
So what's our next move?
Get me split, George, it is. But it's going to be such a comical thing, in 50 years' time. They broke up because Yoko sat on an M.
Did you find yourself relating to any Beatle in particular as you watch the footage? Because I was imagining that as a director, you'd relate to Paul because he's actually trying to direct and get things going.
There's the famous altercation between George and Paul, which is in Let It Be, which we've got as well. The I'll play anything you want, I won't play it all. And both of them are right. George is trying to get the song as good as he can, and he feels he's being rushed and pushed along. He's being rushed and pushed along because Paul's realizing he's committed to like 14 new songs in less than 2 weeks. So Paul's like a director. I mean, I've been on a film set and it's 2:00 in the afternoon and we're only a third of the way through the day and we've got to shoot the rest of it. And I start to behave pretty badly on set. Come on, guys, hurry up, don't do that, don't do that. And so I'm looking at Paul, I think, yeah. But George, on the other hand, is perfectly right too. He's saying, well, I can only play it like I want to. You know, you can push me along all you like, but you're not going to get a better result. So you just understand that these two guys are just perfectly normal, reasonable opinions, but it's the project itself which has imposed this deadline on them, which is bringing this to the surface.
What could it be, Paul? Something in the way she moves. What attracted me at all?
Just say whatever comes into your head each time. Attracts me like a cauliflower until you get the word.
George is great because he's so pragmatic. He's the one where they're talking about going to Libya to do the show in the amphitheatre. But they realise that if they have an audience in Libya full of the local Arabs, that they're not going to understand a word that they're singing. They won't. You know, they're just going to sit there looking dead and bored. So they realise that they need an English-speaking audience in the amphitheatre in Libya. So they're going to have to hire a ship and transport the entire audience for the show to Libya. And George is saying, well, how much is that going to cost? It's going to be crazy. And Paul says, well, we can get the QE2, which was a brand new ship at that point. And John's saying, well, you know, they'll give it to us for free because imagine the publicity that they'll get. And George says, he says, I think you're bloody mad. They don't even give us a free amp. You know, so George is this wonderful, pragmatic guy who takes all the romance out of the other guys who sort of go supernova into these flights of fancy, and he just says, yeah, that's never going to happen. So I really relate to George as a filmmaker. Ultimately, you just have to get down to the basic bare bones of it and get a reality check happening. George is the guy you want in the group. You want John and Paul in your group because you want that genius to be sort of going into these crazy directions, but you always want George in your group as well to say, that's a bloody stupid idea. That's never going to happen. And so I really appreciate George for that. He would be great on a film set because he's a sort of, you know, let's just cut all the crap out, guys. It's you know, we have to get this done. Let's just do it. That's what I think people will take away from this. It's not that John was a genius thing or that Paul was a genius thing or George was underrated. I mean, all the sort of the stories that you read, I mean, sure you can spin it like that, but the Beatles were and always have been just a unit of the four guys, all supporting each other, all liking each other, and having each other's backs. They've got each other's backs every step of the way.
Ringo said that he thought we ought to just tell it like it is.
I think we are.
Get back, George!